Okay, we're in Hey Dalach Yud Gimel. The Mechaber says, it's a continuation sort of last time. The Mechaber says, if you have honey that ants fell into it, bugs fell into it. So we saw in the last halacha, or we talked about in the last halacha, that if you would leave them there for long enough, especially if they were broken apart, they would eventually dissolve. That's not what our thing is for today. Well, maybe they'd be preserved. That was the last halacha. Here he says they fell in there, and they're in there. You want to get them out. So what do? You chamimenu. You can heat it up until the honey becomes a little more fluid. And then you could filter it. Okay? And we're going to talk about what the Mechaber is trying to say in a second. I'm going to do sort of introduction before the Mechaber. So the Mechaber says you heat it up, becomes more fluid, then you can put it through.
Just legs in there?
No. Ants fell into it. Ants fell into it. Okay? So the Mechaber says you can heat it up and filter it out. Okay? So this din is sort of, here's a practice. This is sort of a repetition or a revision of what David hinted at, which is a din in Halachos Pe'alef, which says there that if you have honey and the honey has bee parts mixed into it, so the din is what you do is you heat it up. That helps you be able to filter it. Because now it's more food. You filter it out, and then you can eat it. Okay, that was the din in Pe'al, and our din is not to put the bee parts themselves. This is Hilchos Talon, not Hilchos bees, but that was Pe'al. So over here it says that if a ant fell into it, you could filter it and do the same thing. Okay, the why you're allowed to do it. So the Mechaber says over there why you're allowed to do this. The time from the trait bugs is getting into your food. He says it's not a problem. You shouldn't have a different time of gam. That time that goes in is next time of gam. So there are the bee parts, and over here the ants that are in there are next time of gam to your honey. So you don't have to worry about it. In that halacha, the Beis on that halacha, that's the next thing we'll talk about. But before we get to that, the Beis on that halacha, and some people in our halacha bring it also, bring a Tosfos who sort of talks about a different part of the shaila. He says like this. He says, the Gemara says, in Avodah Zarah, if you have a rat that falls into different liquids, it's noisen tam of gam. Okay, the Gemara is talking about whether is noisen tam of gam mutar aser, and the Gemara has a case of a rat falling into different things, and the Gemara says it's noisen tam of gam. But the Gemara says, if the rat would get ground up, in other words, it's lost in the liquid, the first case of noisen tam of gam is the rat fell in, and you're going to pull the rat out. You're going to pull it out of the drink, and you just have the shaila was it noisen tam. But if it actually got ground up, and now the pieces are in there, and you're not going to get it out, they're stuck in there, so then the Gemara says it's asur. And Tosfos explains, which is like, to us it's obvious, what it means is, because the rat is asur. The rat is maybe nice and time of gam into the liquid, but the rat per se is asur, so if the rat is mixed in, you can't drink the drink because the rat is asur. The rat is asur. Whether it's nice time of gam, that's only a shayla, that's the beginning of the Gemara. If it's nice time of gam into liquid, if you get the animal out. But if you don't get the animal, if you leave it in, then the animal itself is asur. So Tosfos says, wait a second. He says, so how come we eat honey, it has bee legs still mixed into it? He says, what's going on here? The Gemara says that even though it's noisen tam of gam into the liquid, that's only noisen tam of gam if you get the be'en out. So the be'en is out. We only have a shaila of it being noisen tam into the liquid. We say that's noisen tam of gam. But the thing itself is also, he's sort of attaching it to a Gemara. I mean, we would have thought all this logically, but he's attaching to the Gemara. The Gemara says that. He says, so why are you allowed to eat the honey that has the bee legs still inside of it? Okay? So to which Tosfos says, he says a chiddush. I don't know if everybody agrees, but it says a chiddush that the bee legs have a din of atzamas, and as atzamas, there are kind of atzamas that are mutter. What? Okay, so he says the bee legs are atzamas, and therefore you're allowed to eat them even though they're mixed in. So what Tosfos is saying is that the bee legs aren't isser at all. So that, of course, there's no shaila about them being nice and tam to the honey. Okay? For bee legs, there wouldn't be a din in Pe'al. We don't need a din to tell us that it's nice and tam of gam into the honey. Not nice and tam of gam. It's not nice and tam anything. It's kosher. You could, so to speak. You could eat it. Tosfos used to eat it. So, of course, Tosfos. So, the Mechaber in Pe'al is being mitayek. He's not saying bee legs. He says, gufei hadvarim, pieces of honey, of bees, because those things are not atzamas. Those things be'etzem they're asur. But even though they're asur, they're nice time of gam into the honey. So when you heat it up and you filter it out, the pieces are out. The pieces, I'm sure the legs went out also. The pieces are all out. You only have a shaila being nice and tam. For the nice and tam, it's not a problem because it's nice time of gam. Okay. Okay. Nowadays, what we do, everybody filters out their bees, bee legs, bee parts, all the things are filtered out. Except once in a while we have companies that don't. By and large, companies do that. That's the normal thing. People filter out all these things. So we have our case is really the case of payal, like in payal. We heat it up. There's a blia going across when you do the heating. It's not a problem because there's time of God. Okay, those blias are always going to be bottled. Okay. It's interesting to me is that I would have thought the answer was that it would be not because it's so little, because it would be bottled. But he says it's nice time of God, and that's why it's bottled. Okay, even if there's a lot, it's nice time of God. So now onto the second half of the question. This is what you mentioned before also. Our din is one of the few places where the Shulchan Aruch says another principle that so everybody brings this in for a different reason, and that is like this. They all ask a question. It's in the Shach and the Taz here. Everybody says this question: why are you allowed to heat up the honey in our case that has ants mixed into it, or the honey over there that has bee parts mixed into it? Why isn't it bittul l'chatchila? You're spreading tam of isser into your honey. You have an ant in there. Okay, the tam of the ant is usser. The ant is usser. So the ant's tam, that's when you spread that tam out of the ant, that tam is nice tam with gum, but that you're intentionally getting that, you're actively getting that tam into your food, so it should be bittul l'chatchila. So everybody asks this question, and they all say the same answer. No, that's not what the answer is. No, the answer is, that's very interesting. I'll tell you about that in a second. That's a very interesting guy. I'll tell you about that in a second. Or maybe after I'll talk to you about it. So he says, everybody says the same answer is, Ein Kavonoso Levatel. My goal over here is to purify my honey. I'm not trying to get the time of the bee, of the ants into my honey. That's not what I'm trying to do over here. I'm trying to purify my honey. The only way to do that is to filter it. The only way to filter it is to heat it up first. So the fact that I'm getting time in is I'm stuck with it. It's like by mistake. I have no choice. But my goal here is to purify my honey, and that's what I'm trying to do. You know, that's my and therefore it's mutter. And so this din, it's not in the halachos of bittul l'chatchila. In our din, it says the din that if you're in Kavonoso Levatel, you're allowed to do it. Okay, there are places we talk about it. Shulchan Aruch, there are many places that say this. So our case is brought by a lot of people as an example of it. What David said.
What's an example of being Levatel Isser l'chachila, where it wouldn't be your kavanah? Because either way, if you're trying to Levatel, it means you're trying to Levatel the time. So what?
Say it again. If you're
trying to Levatel, it means you're trying to Levatel the time, right?
Depends what the
No, you want him to settle something in this product.
Let's say when you make bread, it's common. Let's say it would be cheap. When you make bread, it's common to put milk into it.
Right.
And it helps with whatever it is. It makes it last longer. Whatever it does.
Okay.
It's not wasting time. It's in tiny time. Right. It's put in for whatever reason.
You want to increase the amount.
Increases the amount. What you said about Asher Shamash B'Shefa, we're going to sort of say
milk in the bread is Kavonoso Levatel.
It's kind of right. You want it in your bread. You want it in there. You're trying to get it into the bread, not necessarily for time. Like you said, right? How could you want it for time if it's going to be? But what you said, I never thought of. I never thought that you could say Asher Shamash B'Shefa. You talk about that on the end. Asher Shamash B'Shefa is for blias. Okay, we'll talk about it. Okay. Anyhow, so next time, in the next halacha, in halacha Yudalad, we're going to talk about a very practical application. Broccoli cocoa, about a very practical application of Ein Kavonoso Levatel in Hilchos Teloim. Okay, but for today we're not going to do it. Today we're going to talk about the rest of the Ein Kavonoso Levatel, not the Teloim. The Teloim part is in the next halacha where it doesn't say Ein Kavonoso Levatel. It's a shiny what it means. That's what we see next time. For the
It's still open in our minutes, by the way.
What?
That topic is still open.
It's open.
Yes,
I told you it's going to be an halachos. I know that way it's coming.
We're still waiting.
It's because the shach is an halachos, not an our halacha, so we're waiting for that halacha. But the our halacha is everybody brings it as a din legate to the din of ein vatel is mutter if it's ein Kavonoso Levatel. So a question that we're going to talk about is like this. Pesach Tshuva brings a Noid Yehuda. Okay, the Noid Yehuda is in a few places. Interestingly enough, the main place where he talks about it, or the most straight, he always tells you, is in one place where it's a Hagah. It's not even in the body of the Noid Yehuda. At first I wasn't even sure it was the Noid Yehuda himself, but later in the other Tshuvas he keeps referring back, you know what I said over there, and it's in this little Hagah on the side. It's in a very long Tshuva. And he says like this. He says, the din of this hectare of Ein Kavonoso Levatel is only when the Isser and the hectare are already mixed together. And I'm doing something to make it mutter. So, for example, in our case, I have the ants are already in my honey, and I'm doing something with this thing, which is in Kavonoso Levatel. But he says you're never allowed to put in the Isser and say I'm in Kavonoso Levatel. In the case in Pei Aleph, the bee parts are in the honey already. When I get a cup of honey, it has the bee parts in it. So I'm allowed to do something to get it out if in Kavonoso Levatel. He says, but if you're doing it on purpose, if you're putting it in, you're never allowed to put Isser into Heter. Even in Kavonoso Levatel doesn't help for that. What are his cases? He has a lot of cases, but in the Tshuvas, some of the cases that he talks about are some cases that you may know. One is Isinglass. Okay, what is Isinglass? Isinglass is a flocculent, another big word. Okay, Isinglass is something made out of fish bladder, fish something or others. Okay, and it's used as English, I think. But a flocculent is also English. Okay, flocculent means like this: when you have particles of protein floating around in something, like in an alcoholic beverage, that's what he's talking about. You have protein floating around in it. It's very hard to filter it out. So what you do is you put something in that attracts these particles of protein. This thing itself attracts them. So
like a magnet.
Yes, okay, if you want to call it that. It attracts the protein. Then the clumps, there are now clumps of protein instead of little pieces of protein. They either sink to the bottom and you just scoop them out, or even if they don't go anyplace, they're now bigger pieces. It's easier to filter them out. Okay, so a flocculent, that's what this is. It's a flocculent. You put it in, it attracts all the cloudy, hazy parts of the beer come into the thing. He's not talking about beer, but the same. We do it for beer. It attracts all those pieces to it. Either they sink to the bottom, they sink to the bottom, and you get them out, or wherever they are, you can then filter them out easier because they're bigger clumps. Okay, so he's talking about like that. So that's an example we would think of in Kavonoso Levatel. If the Isinglass, it comes from a trait fish, and I'm putting it in from the fish, I don't want fish in my alcohol. I'm trying to get the cloudiness. I want to make a clear beverage. Not only that, in that case, it actually comes out. Come on, all of it gets filtered out in the end. I put it in temporarily. It's just like passes through to get it out. Okay, so that's one of his. That's the example in the main. What I think is the main truth about it. He says you're not allowed to do that because you're putting it in. It's not in already. You're putting it in. Another one of his cases.
You're not putting it in to be mapatel.
He said it ain't Kavonoso Levatel is only mutter if the Isser is already in the heter. But if you're never allowed to put the Isser into the heter. That you're not allowed to do.
Even though I'm not doing it to be mapatel.
Even though it's in Kavonoso Levatel is only. If it's already in, you could add more heter, you could grind it up, there's all kinds of things you could do if you're in Kavonoso, but you can't put it in yourself. Another case is
gelatin and apple juice.
Same thing, right? Gelatin and apple juice. So the
meat that they hang.
The next case, another one of his cases. Another case.
Helps to filter.
Another one of his cases is meat that they put into whiskey. So the wording was not so clear to me what the goal was. One thing was he says to mellow the taste, okay, which is sort of like how we use glycerin. We use glycerin in alcoholic beverages to make them smoother. That's why we put in small amounts of it. That was one thing he said. He said another thing. There was another thing he said to me that made it sound like he was talking about an antifoam, okay, which is also what we use animal fat for. The wording wasn't so clear to me if that's what he meant.
I heard that. Yeah.
No, it's true that people do. It wasn't clear if that was the case exactly he was talking about. Maybe you do. This is maybe who has this case. And so again, in this case also, you're putting the Isser in order to for Kavonoso Levatel, you don't have any interest in having it in there. You have some other reason for having it in there. He says you're now allowed to put the Isser in. And he has other places that he brings who he thinks are riots to him. Other cases where places say don't do X, don't do Y. There's cases with Magen Avraham about whitening wine. A bunch of different cases like that. He says Kavonoso Levatel does not allow you to put Isser in. It only allows you to do things if the Isser got in by itself. And our example of it is what we just said. Antifoams is our modern example of that. Or David said here about the gelatin filtering. Those are cases where someone will be getting something in. Not at all. It's a processing aid. It just helps you in making the food. No one wants it in there. No one cares for the antifoam in there. It's like maybe, I don't know if this is a good example. Sure. The what is it called? I forgot it. What's in pills to help them slide through the machinery?
Oh yeah.
Stearic. We put stearic to help them. So nobody wants it in there. It helps you in producing the thing. It helps it produce a processing aid. So the Ned would say that in all those cases you're not allowed to do. It's not considered in Kavonoso Levatel because you're putting it in is never allowed. Okay, so one of the riots Ned brings is he says like this. There's a machlokes, as we know, about whether you're allowed to use a kli that's asur l'shtamish b'shefa. If you're allowed to use it without kashrus. Okay? So he says like this. What's that mean? You have a kli that has a bleed in it. Let's say,
Got a cup.
let's say this is a cup, and the bleed, there was a tiny drop of Isser fell at the top of the cup. Okay, so the only way to use that the Isser would get absorbed back into Heter is if you'd fill the whole cup up. Okay, so if you had that much liquid into it, then the bleed would always be bottled, because there's only a small amount of bleed. So since the bleed came out to the top, there are some Rishonim who hold that you're allowed to use the kli. There's no Isser to use the kli without kashering it, because whenever you use it, it will automatically be bottled. And therefore, there's no Isser to use the kli. Okay. So he says, that's a machlokes.
There's no average. I'm just going to attack. This is obviously before 24 hours.
Yes.
If it's after 24 hours, we wouldn't even say a word.
No, even after 20. There's a Shiloh after 24 hours also. Yes, part of the same Shiloh.
Yeah.
Yes. So now, he says, but let's take the Mekilim in that Shiloh. If also Shiloh is mutter. He says, what would happen if the bleed would be over here in the cup, or towards the bottom, where it isn't always Batal B'Shishim? So what's the din? You can't use it. You can't use the cup. You can't use the cup unless you kasher it. So he says, let's say I want to put a lot of liquid into the cup. I'm going to put in so much that the amount of bleed that's in there on the bottom of the cup is going to be bottled. Are you allowed to use it? No, you're not allowed to. Also, Sham Shefa means is if it's always used b'shefa, then you're allowed to use it. What happens if it's only sometimes used b'shefa, and I choose to use it in the way that it'll be bottled? Am I allowed to use it? He says, no, you're not allowed to use it. He says, why not? It's in Kavonoso Levatel. The little bit of this that's in there is going to be bottled into the food. You obviously have no interest in having that bleed get into your food. You couldn't be doing anything. It's not nice and time. You don't have any interest in it getting into your food. So you're in Kavonoso. I just want to take a drink out of the cup. The fact that the bleed is in it is going to mix into my food, I don't want that. So why can't I do that? Why don't you say it's in Kavonoso Levatel and I'm allowed to use the cup, because in the case where the bleed is on the bottom, but I'm using it
Why is the mutter where it can only be used as shefa?
So in the case when it's always used b'shefa, it's a Rashi, but it says that the reason is because there the Torah never said you have to kasher it. The din of kasher is only if it's possible. Don't you need bittul, but the Torah never told you have to kasher in that case. It's like nothing. It's not a clear that could be nice. It can't be nice. So it can't be nice in time. It's like can't. We kasher things because of time kicker. It can't be nice in time. It's like impossible for it to be nice in time. Unless you have two layers. It's not possible.
Okay, I mean, but once we know kashering is not like just is not like it's a problem that the bleeds are getting in. The bleeds are getting in. You need bittul. If you need bittul, then you're being about to.
Right. So you're looking at it at that's if you hold Asr Sham Shef as Asr. If you hold that it's mutter, that it's much more connected to time kicker. If there's no possible for time kicker, then there's no fear to kasher. Okay, anyhow. So that's what he said. He said that's a raya. That's a raya. That the reason why it's also in this case is because you're putting the isser into your food. By putting your coffee into here, you're making that the bleed is going to get in.
Yeah,
you're never allowed to put the isser in by choice. You're only allowed to have it if the isser is already in. Then you can say in Kavonoso.
I mean, anytime you have when you're dealing with time, it's already mixed. So until you heat it up, it's not really. You're not putting it in until you heat it up.
Okay, you're right. When the ants fell into the honey, until I cook it, nothing's right. It's not going to get spent. But I am not the one who is the isser into the heter. The isser and the heter they interacted with each other already. They started.
Here also you have the liquid in the cup is touching the cup, so there is an interaction. It's not.
No. Right now, the cup is. This is an empty cup, and there's a pot of coffee. Right. So right now they have nothing to do with each other. I'm the one who brought the isser with the heter. So you're right. It's very subtle over here because you're right. The B parts work nice and time to them. They're sort of separate. You know what I mean? But that's what he said. There's only heter in that case. Okay. So that's one of his rayas. He has a few rayas. Most of his rayas are rayas from other places. That place says it. Then it must be for this reason. This is a logical raya. He says it must be that I'm right because of this raya. So there's a sefer called Nachas Tzvi. Okay, it's printed in Shulchan. It's from the person who wrote the Pischei Tshuva. Okay, it's in the Pischei Tshuva over here. He says, and you go look at Nachas Tzvi, you'll see. In the Pischei Tshuva he brings no Yehuda. And he says, look at Nachas Tzvi, you'll see why I don't agree with him. Okay, so Nachas Tzvi is his own chidushim. Not Pischei Tshuva just writing over what other people said, and this is his own chidushim. There's a long piece of Nachas Tzvi about this. So he brings he has a lot to say about it. He brings lots of places who disagree with the Yehuda. The Yehuda had a lot of people who he thought were like him. He has a lot of people who don't agree with him. And he answers his raya. His raya was from this case of using the kli. And he answers like this. He says that really, in theory, the Yehuda is right. In theory, you would be allowed to use the kli in a way that the town would be bottled. You really could. But Chazal didn't let you because they were afraid you might use it with too little. You said if I put in 10 ounces of water, it'll be bottle, but if I put in 6 ounces, it wouldn't be bottle. So today I'm going to put in 10 ounces, and tomorrow I'm going to forget myself and I'll put in 6 ounces. So the Chazal ashered it because you might do the wrong thing. He compares it to a Gzer Eina Ben Yom Ata Ben Yomai. Really, min hadin a kli that's Eina Ben Yomai you're allowed to use. There's nothing wrong with using the plias, can't asher your food. Chazal said don't use it when it's Eina Ben Yomai because by mistake you might make your wrong cheshbon and use it when it's Ben Yomai. So the same way they said don't use it after 24 hours, you might use it before 24 hours. They said also don't use it with a lot of liquid because you might use it with a little liquid. They only kept the heter in cases when it's automatic. It's impossible to use it, then they kept it. So he says, and that's why you're not allowed to use the kli, but in theory, it would be right that you're allowed to use the thing in the kli. There'd be no problems of tam kicker. It's only xeris chacham. So it just leaves us with, both of them are, they're not saying the same thing, but they both have the same question on them, which is, he doesn't have any makar that is such a xeris chazal. Right? We don't have a Gemara that says anything like that. We don't have a Gemara that says that chachamim were geyser putting a lot into a kli until you put a little into a kli. We don't have any such makar. We have a xeris eina ben yom ata ben yomai that the Gemara talks about. Where's the makar to say? We know that it's true. In practice, if you go home, your wife will tell you can't use a tray of kli without touching it. But where's the makar to tell us that this is new xera? But for the same matter, I don't want to say it's not a one-sided question. The Rebbe Yehuda also has no makar to what he said. He doesn't bring us a raya. Where's the Gemara that says that? Where's Rishonim speaking out that ein Kavonoso Levatel is only mutter if they're already mixed together? This is a foreign detail over here. You mix it in, you're not allowed to. If it's already mixed in, you are allowed to. The whole thing ein Kavonoso Levatel is like sort of a half a din here by mistake here I've sort of been passing about the honey over here, and there's other examples like that. But why isn't someone speaking out? It's what the Rebbe Yehuda says. It's mutter in this case, but not in this case. There's a very big difference between them. Most of the ein Kavonoso Levatels are the Rebbe Yehuda's style, so to speak, rather than what the Mechaber says. So both of them have this question, which is they're both explaining this din in their own way. The Rebbe Yehuda says it's because you can't mix Sisserin. The Nachas is saying it's because you can't. It's because it's a xera until you might put in the wrong amount. And neither of them, again, we don't have anything to say why that should be wrong, and they have to be miyashav. We have to explain it, but we don't have any good makar to each one of these things. Makar meaning like a Gemara or a Rishon speaking it out more clearly. We're just saying, it'll be miyashav a question, but it's not a. Anyhow, so just to finish this part, before we're almost done really, but before to finish up this part, Lamaisa, as the Nachas Tzvi says, he says it himself, he says the common practice is to not let the Yehuda, and that even if a person puts the food in is allowed to put in the Isser into the heter if he's ein Kavonoso Levatel. But the Yehuda said that ein Kavonoso Levatel only helps you if it's already mixed in. Most people don't learn that. Okay, he has lots of names. There are names on both sides of this thing. Most people are making like the Nachas. He says that if you put it in with ein Kavonoso Levatel, it's mutter, even though you actually put that Isser into that. Okay, so two other things just to end with these two things. The din of ein Vatel Nisel Chatila is a din d'Rabbanan. Okay, just about everybody holds that. That's only a din d'Rabbanan that you can't be Vatel Nisel Chatila. Yes, the Rebbe Yehuda. Oh, I don't know that. I don't know. There's such the sheet to arrive it. It holds like that. I don't know.
What's the source?
What's the source? That what? It's a Gemara. The Gemara talks about ein Vatel Nisel Chatila. And what should be the raya that it's the right? I don't remember. Why should you think so? That what? That's
can be
that means that the etzem bittul chatchilas would be a deraisa. Very interesting. Okay, so what? Very good. Why is it? The Gemara is a raya.
Right. I understand. So if you send the bird away, then
the Gemara says.
You see this bird is not bucking the other birds.
She's mutter. It's mutter. Otherwise it would be shalach with hakol. When you shalach with hakol, it's buckle.
Oh, it'll be bucking the other birds. This bird bucking.
Elamai must be. He's saying it's in the right. Okay, very interesting. Okay, anyhow, so we have some lessons on it. And the mela, if only a suffix isser, we would say there's no ein Vatel Nisel Chatila for a suffix isser. Now, that would mean is most of the times when we think about bittul Nisel Chatila, we're talking about suffix isser. Okay, when we say, let's say, an antiphon, we don't know that it's treif. It's a suffix treif. So, for us, it would seem that most of the times the shaila is not going to be sonegea because usually, just let me finish. Usually, the isser is only a suffix isser. Okay, now it happens to be the Yehuda in two of his tshuvas are talking about Vada Yisr. Okay, it's a piece of a fish or a piece of an animal of Nevela. It's Vada Yisr. The implication from one of it wasn't clear to me. My reading of it sounded like he was saying even it will be Safi Yisr. But l'chara, we would think that there would be a reason, the last tshuva. It would seem to me that to us it wouldn't be usually so negaya, because usually we deal with Safi Yisr. What do you want to say there?
If it's something this is the so we have to first answer on the suffix, right? And then once something is answered,
okay, so you should. That's part of one of the truths in the Yehuda. What should we say in this scholar? Should we first down as Isser? Should first down as Isser? Right. So the big part of the tshuva, I can't tell you that I know what he says. There's a big part of the tshuva about that. So Ken, you might be right. There's maybe we have to down on it first and say I can't eat it, and then okay, so that might ruin what I'm saying. Okay, but no. You might. I'm not disagreeing with you. You might be right. The Yehuda doesn't say it in that way. When he's at that part, it's a different tshuva. Okay. The other thing is. One other thing that in Kavonoso Levatel is that the Taz says the Taz is actually talking about a Mishnah that says that in Kavonoso Levatel is mutter. I forgot about that. That Mishnah actually is a right against the Yehuda. That's interesting. Okay, we talked about this beforehand. I'll say it for a second, just now that I remember. Yeah, the Mishnah says if you have a person presses his truma grapes in a press, or he stores his truma grains in a warehouse, and he wants to now put chulin into those places, so he has to do a certain amount of cleaning, and after he does that amount of cleaning, he's able to put the heter into it, the chulin into it. So it's a Mishnah. So the question is, and you don't get everything out. It's not going to be perfectly clean. So the question is, well, why are you allowed to do that? So the answer is because the answer that is going to be bottled. The truma is going to be bottled into the food. You say, wait a second, the truma is going to be bottled into the food, but it's bittul sechatila. Because you could have gotten more out. So the answer is that the Mishnah is saying it's in Kavonoso Levatel, and since it's in Kavonoso Levatel, you're just trying to put in your grain. You show that you're trying to clean it out, so you clean that as well as what would be reasonable, and therefore you're not required to clean up more than that. It's good enough. You clean that good enough. So actually, we have to think about this. I didn't think of this before, and that l'chara is I'm about to tell you a taz about that, but that l'chara is a right now. You have to think about this, because that case is telling you you're allowed to put the chulin into the warehouse, you're allowed to put the chulin into the press, even though there's truma in there already, right? So why isn't that a raya that bittul is l'chatchila, even if you connect them to each other together? We have to think about it. Maybe it's different because it's truma. Okay. Anyhow, so we have to think about that. Okay. So the Taz says this whole heter of en Kavonoso Levatel. This is the Taz is talking about that din, not over here. The Taz is in, I think, Ramadan. I think he's talking about that din. So the Taz says the whole din of en Kavonoso Levatel is something in your mind. I don't have in mind to do this thing. I have something else in mind. So Taz says, well, what happens if you have two choices? Let's say, for example, a person wants to clarify his beer, and he could either put in isinglass from the treif fish, or he could put in a spoonful of some chemical from Nalco that will clarify the beer. Okay, he has a choice of which thing to put in, and he chooses to put in the isinglass into it. So by his choosing to put in the isinglass, he lost his en Kavonoso Levatel. How can you tell me you don't want that in your food? If you just wanted to clarify your beer, you would have put in the chemical. Why did you put in this stuff? Elamai, it must be that you really do want to have that in your food. Now, of course, you don't really want to, but it's like a sort of a kavanos. It takes away from your en Kavonoso Levatel. How can you say you don't want it? Why didn't you choose the other one?
More about price.
So the Taz says, if it's a reasonable choice, if the two equal choices, then choosing the Isra over the Heter takes away from your en Kavonoso Levatel. But like you said, that's very much dependent on the situation. If one costs more than the other one, or one works better, or one is... if it's 100 reasons, then I go back to the en Kavonoso Levatel. But in some cases, choosing the Isra over the Heter means, if I have two choices, I lose my en Kavonoso Levatel by that, because by choosing one, I show that I don't